Oh, so that's where Sweet got it from. Getting right back into things, we open episode 12 with an actually clever bit of recap, mostly not from Nagisa, but rather her friends. Yeah, legit, I really like this as not only do they accomplish their usual job of catching you viewers up on events, but it also feels rather natural for these girls to recount things that they likely saw on the news. It actually makes it feel like this world is a little more lived in as we get more perspectives beyond just our two leads.
3D みたいで面白くない?
We already did the Jaws 3D joke. Anyway, Nagisa was understandably still a little shell-shocked from the previous episode, and that quickly went away after she saw someone handing out. Hey, y'all hear something? Uh-oh. Though, more than this particular candy, I'm more distracted by how freaking huge this lady is in spite of her overly cutesy design. I mean, I'm not saying tall girls can't be cute, but that's a very youthful face and design. It'd be like making Yuki from Saki the tallest character in the show. Oh wait, they did do that for the live action. Yeah. And sure enough, it was a poorly constructed mask on the face of Poisony, who after some impressive research, probably read the wiki, managed to come up with a clever plan to steal Meppel, while Nagisa was distracted by all of the cocoa bean products. Moreover, she not only left the Zakenna in her phone bag, but she also had laced all of the candy with them. Surrounded and without Meppel, they could have easily finished her off, but...
He's got a board with a nail in it!
And save humanity, will you?
Still a really smart plan that should have worked better, but then I guess we wouldn't have a show. Anyway, unable to get anything out of the sleeping fairy, god this guy even sucks as a hostage, Poisony decided to move on to taking Mippo from Honoka. Realizing that her partner was in danger, Nagisa tried to find her, and ended up cluing in her grandmother Sanai that she was in danger. And sure enough, Poisony made contact with her in her most dangerous of forms, an old Karen. Nah, of course, she was just taking advantage of Honoka's relationship with her own grandmother that would make her more receptive to talking with an elderly lady. Again, a very impressive first outing for this villainess, who was using some spot-on profiling to take advantage of her targets. It had gotten to the point that she managed to mentally traumatize Nagisa.
ダメよ、ほのか。そこはダメ!
Top 10 things you'll never hear in modern Precure. Though in Honoka's case, she also used some other methods to loosen her grip on Mipple.
一体何が起きたの? お花畑はどこまで続いているのか?
Lady, I'm pretty sure those aren't flowers. She made the superheroine believe that her idol, Dr. Brexton, was talking to her, even though he had long since passed away. His excuse was that his spirit still wanted to do a little more research, which would just so happen to require the little piece of plastic she carried around. Because yeah, letting an Einstein stand-in discover new stuff can only lead to good things. Fortunately, before another bomb could be dropped, Sanai had stepped in to reclaim her granddaughter.
あなた、誰です?
Is Granny gonna have to go Ultra Instinct on your ass? Seriously, this old lady was every bit as badass as the Super Saiyan, as not only was she able to see through Poisony, but she also maintained a smile while saying that she wasn't going to let the phony granny do anything to her granddaughter. Rightfully shaken by this, Poisony just decided to drop the act, and I'm guessing managed to possess everyone who had eaten her Zakenna treats. Weird, I usually thought not eating a Snickers turns you into something you're not. As a result, they managed to gang rush Honoka into letting go of Mipple, with even Nagisa crowd surfing not being able to save her. Thus, it was up to Sanai to save the day. Hey, considering they're not letting Shaggy go Ultra anymore, why not? But yeah, an awesome moment for Granny, which I guess sufficed as our fight of the week, as Poisony bailed out after the Cures transformed. Thus, all they could do was a little cleanup with their healing spell, which, yeah, I kind of forgot was a thing too. Though, as for why Sanai was able to go UI beyond having Goku's voice, she also did have a connection with Mippo that would get elaborated on later. But for now, it did make sense considering that the fairy had been a box sealed in her storage house. Though, and also, she told you her granddaughter was a superheroine. Seriously, they don't make grannies like this anymore. The following episode featured the debut of a brand new character. Yep, totally hadn't seen this Kiriya kid in the show up until now. I'm sure he and that Rio boy will get along real well. There was also a bit of a B-plot here, with Honoka helping complete an experiment involving lightning for a science expo. As a result, unlike Nagisa, she didn't really get to know Kiriya or his dog.
あんたがあしらわれるとはね、キリア。
I hate how I live in a world where someone is getting off to this. Nah, of course, this literal bitch was Poisony, and Kiriya was not only an evil general, but also her little brother. A little brother who was kind of ahead of his time.
その姿もかなり目立つと思うよ。
Just get an OnlyFans and you'll be able to finance your king's evil plans several times over. The day of the expo arrived with Nagisa watching from the audience alongside Fuji P, and oh god, you're starting to reach ladybug levels of stalkery there, Nagisa. Well, anyway, Honoka's team's experiment eventually went up, and having likely heard about it from her brother, Poisony struck. Oh great, it's been infected with the Sigma virus. Well, get ready to be stuck with this guy for at least the next 8 games. The resulting fight could have been interesting, as it had both Honoka's science club friend trying to prevent them from destroying their experiment, and Nagisa's 2 friends who we've seen throughout the series in danger, but ultimately all of them were just kind of shoved off to the side, and as usual, our heroines just pulled out their finisher to just kind of abruptly end things. I mean, granted, Nagisa's friends would become a little more relevant in the next episode as a result of this fight, but it was clear that this episode was more focused on introducing Kiriya to our duo. Though, at least the ending was kind of sweet, with Honoka and the club naming the experiment after the aforementioned friend, who they felt deserved to have the experiment named after, in spite of her insistence that Honoka should have taken the credit. Cute stuff for an okay-ish episode. However, episode 14 was a lot more entertaining, at least from a meta standpoint. As we just mentioned them, Nagisa's friends ended up helping spread some rumors about our heroines, much to their chagrin, knowing that their secret identities were in danger of being exposed, as if they weren't already, with them having exactly no disguise when transformed, but whatever. They were understandably a little on edge because of the events of the previous episode that forced them to transform in an open area. Things only got more complicated when these two, Natsuko and Kyoko, entered the chat.
ブラックはかなり可愛くてイケてるけど、ホワイトはいまいちなんだって。
Hey, if you guys want to have these sorts of arguments, please do it in the comment section. I could always use the engagement. But yeah, this is actually a really interesting conflict that I do like to see in my superhero media, with the characters having to deal with the dangers of their secret identity being blown through the power of rumor and gossip, which of course has only gotten worse with the advent of social media. I mean, just look at poor Spidey, for example. It promotes good drama and suspense, whilst also making our hero's world feel a little more lived in, as of course rumors about superpowered beings would spread like wildfire. And as the Dark Knight showed, when heroes become idols, it will inevitably result in imitators.
あなたたち何やってるの？いや、あのね。
So yeah, this is an imposter hero episode where, spoilers, these two are going to become antagonists in just a bit, so they'll also become evil counterparts. This has been a trope in toy properties for a while, with the earliest example I could find being from Jacker Dengenkitai, the second Super Sentai ever, before the franchise was even called Super Sentai. In episode 22 of that series, some random evil foot soldiers known as the Crimers put on some Jacker cosplay to act as moving dummies for the Monster of the Week and his troops, hence why they were called the Dummy Jackers. They didn't do much else in the episode, as again, they were just common grunts in cosplay. However, the concept of evil Sentai, or more specifically, evil knockoffs, would carry on into future shows, including into Zoo Ranger, which again used their series foot soldiers to impersonate the Sentai, which then resulted in Power Rangers' first Evil Rangers, when that episode was adapted for Mighty Morphin. Power Rangers, huh? Say, does anyone remember the Evil Rangers from that franchise? No, I'm not talking about adaptations from Sentai. I'm talking about their own original creations.
This is such good.
Yeah, maybe y'all should just be glad that these two have at least halfway decent costumes. Hell, their voices are even kind of suited for Precure. Natsuko was voiced by Ami Koshimizu, who would eventually become Hibiki Hojo, and while Kyoko's Kaori Nazuka would only become the sister of a Cure, she did at least become a magical girl clearly modeled after the Precure.
私の友達はイディアだけ。あなたたちには関係ないでしょ。
Now that's what a Chad Cure should sound like. But yeah, it's kind of interesting hearing both of these VAs still relatively early into their respective careers. Koshimizu especially sounds different, as she still hadn't developed her fire-brandy voice for Kallen Stadfeld that she would later use for Hibiki.
わーって変身して悪いやつやっつける女の子の二人組のことよ。これで決める。最強のコンビは私たちみんなに決まってるじゃない。
And until she actually became Cure Melody, Natsuko and Kyoko ended up committing some good old copyright infringement after telling a little lie that snowballed into them play acting our heroines and not doing a great job at it. Yeah, that's a mood. Now, of course, this episode came out while this franchise was still very much in its infancy, so the very idea of the Precure having an impressionable fan base was still a bit of a ways away. Hell, some of Toei's original plans wouldn't have resulted in the sort of following it has now, but more on that later. But yeah, I think this episode was more of a general commentary on superhero impersonators, which again has been a thing for a while. You know, people who IRL try to emulate their favorite heroes, and while this certainly can be a good thing if you live by or spread some of the hero's ideals like Natsuko and Kyoko were doing by making some kids happy, it is also important to recognize what these characters represent and what fully embodying these monikers can result in. If you actually think just putting on some spandex and a cape aren't going to give you superpowers, then really you're just asking for an ass whooping when you try to pick a fight with a thug. Or in the case of these two, it can paint some big targets on ya. Poisony used the two as bait to lure out the genuine Arcos, and then as some effective puppets who, while not of any sort of physical threat, though she might have enhanced their strength, they could be turned into lemmings that the Precures had to constantly save, whilst dealing with the real threat of a couple of construction Zakena. Yeah, this fight just got plain dark at times, mostly thanks to the imposter Cure's dead lifeless eyes as they almost committed Sudoku multiple times. Honestly, great stuff that just made Poisony more monstrous than even the creepy Zakena she had created. And as a result, I didn't even mind the usual sudden finisher wrap-up, as everything we had gotten beforehand had been fantastically intense and dramatic. My only complaint was that I feel they could have shown these two being a little more inspired by the Precure. Hell, they didn't even open their eyes to see what Nagisa and Honoka were doing for them, and instead just fainted. And afterwards, even though they said they'd respect the symbol of the Precure a little more by dropping the act, they went right back to it the next day.
We hope you've enjoyed No Moral Theater.
All that said though, I still did really like this episode, both for the Sentai references and providing a bit of a prophetic commentary of this franchise for better and for worse. Rolling into episode 15, both of our heroines were rolling out to get some R&R over their vacations. Going by Far's description, Nagisa's family were supposed to go to a lakeside hotel, but as it turned out, it was actually an inn called the Reku Sardo. Okay, that doesn't even qualify as a bad pun. Speaking of which,
その昔はノーベル賞を夢見たこともあるんだ。ノーベル賞ぐらいかな。
Okay, so confession time. I'm really embarrassed that I didn't recognize that Mr. Misumi here was voiced by freaking Teru Koyasu. I mean, aside from the fact he's gonna play a couple more characters in this franchise, I can't believe I didn't recognize freaking Dio. Granted, I'm not even sure if Uncle made these many dad jokes. Anyway, not too surprisingly, Honoka and her grandmother ended up staying at the same inn along with a certain stalker villainess. And while Koyasu's dad jokes weren't working on me, I gotta say, this scene more than made up for it.
ないよね。さあ、お土産でも見に行こう。
The OG, where they did mind throwing in a little bit of body horror as comedy. All three characters ended up hearing about a legend of an island on the lake they were nearby. Basically, it was the story of a maiden and her two male childhood friends who fell in love with her and she couldn't pick between the two.
果たし合いをして相打ちで死んでしまう。
Written by Toshiki Inoue. Actually, it needs a much trashier ending than that. Just go with some X-Men comparisons. A couple of shrines were erected for Cyclops and Wolverine's armors, and were said to grant wishes to those who prayed to them. Thus, our heroines decide to check it out, not realizing that their ferryman was actually Poisony in disguise. Naturally, she turned the samurai armors into Zakenna because why not make a couple of the most awesome monsters of the week ever? Seriously, this is easily one of my favorite fights of the early part of the series, both because of these things' great designs, and the fact that they put up a very decent fight, forcing the Precure to take them on simultaneously. Hell, they might have even won had it not been for a bit of a deus ex machina. Granted, Jean's flute playing was exposited earlier in the episode, so it wasn't just coming out of nowhere, plus at least there was a nice little story behind it. Because, as it turned out, like many legends, there was another telling. In the more badass variation, Wolverine and Cyclops died protecting Jean rather than by each other's hands, which was likely the correct version, judging by how the spirits in the armor acted. A really nice episode that explores how legends can vary and sometimes heavily deviate from their proper tellings. It was also a good spotlight episode for Daddy Dio, who aside from his bad puns, did try to save the two, and rightfully got pissed off at his daughter for going off to a secluded island without telling them. And yet, ultimately, they did make up, with him assuring her that he just really loved his daughter. Again, really good stuff, made even better just by Koyasu's voice acting, and likely some of his ad-libbing that he also did for Happiness Charge.
待ってろよくそまっすぐ進まん目が回る
こんにちは
はいこんにちは
16 opened with Jarky doing his usual stick of talking down to his minions. Dude, do you need some diarrhea medicine? Because I've got some right here. Anyway, Kiriya said that he had some things in the works that we'd see more of in the next episode, so for now, Poisony found her next target, which was the superstar of the Precure school, Yuka, and yeah, I know they're clearly saying Madonna here, but let's face it, that name doesn't have great connotation these days. And hell, at least this girl was trying to do something with her life by participating in multiple clubs and activities. Granted, she was putting a little too much on her plate to try and maintain her superstar image, to the point that it was an obsession that Nagisa unintentionally threatened.
Not scientifically possible!
But yeah, this is actually a really good story exploring how this supposed master of all was still very much a flawed human who was overexerting herself and did even have her moments of bitterness as a result.
楽しいですよ私が小学生だったら参加してもいいんだけど
Is it any real surprise that this was written by one of the more prolific Ojama Shotoremi writers who would really go in with all of these one-off schoolmate episodes? Hell, even Poisony's plan felt like something out of Doremi when she Zakennified Yuka's shadow, resulting in...
小田島先輩
Once again, the magic of Control-CV saves a lot on animation. I kid, of course, as this episode actually had some pretty great direction. Like, I really appreciate some of the little touches, like Honoka trying to clue Nagisa in on Yuka's anxiety, and even this game of rock, paper, scissors that actually played out like a real game of rock, paper, scissors. I don't know, I just find little touches like that to be fun to notice. Anyway, the quote-unquote fight of this episode featured our heroines trying to deal with the Yuka clone army, who I guess were trying to suffocate them. Yeah, normally this wouldn't be that much of a threat, but since the real Yuka was mixed in with the clones, they couldn't risk fighting back. Fortunately, Honoka realized that since they were shadows, a little light was all they needed.
それよよっしゃ叩きのめせ
Nah, of course, Honoka stopped her, and they quickly marked the real one as Poisony resummoned the clones. And I guess because the animators realized having our superheroines be up a bunch of young girls, clones or not, would be a bit iffy, so they instead just had them reform back into a generic Zakenna. Pity, as it also seemed to affect its intelligence, otherwise it would have known you never vor the superheroines who could summon down the lightning of God. A good and actually really unique fight featuring a very interesting spotlight character of the episode. Episode 17 featured our heroines helping out at a farm alongside members members of the soccer club, which of course included Kiriya and Fuji P. Yeah, Honoka had actually invited Nagisa in an attempt to help push their relationship. Pretty sure there was a different ship that many fans were pushing for by this point in the series, but let's keep that to ourselves for now. Not to mention, another ship did kind of take off here, as Honoka split off to harvest cabbages with Kiriya.
頑張ったって無駄ですよ。キャベツこんなにたくさんあるんですよ。
Try to tell that to the characters of Konosuba. But yeah, not too surprisingly, the unknown villain was incredibly nihilistic, which Honoka only really saw as average teen angst. As a result, she tried her best to make him open up by forcing him to work a little extra.
いうとこちょっとおっかないな。
そんなことないです。ほのかが注意するのはその人を思ってのことなんですよ。
Wow, so you actually can use that phrase effectively. Who'd have thunk? However, while this ship was at least sailing smoothly, Nagisa and Fujipi were stuck in the middle of the ocean. Fortunately, she did find some help in the form of product placement. She borrowed a love mirror from the fairies that was probably about as accurate as most apps these days.
入れなくてもこれを使えば先輩が私のことどう思ってるかわかるわ。
And if it doesn't, I'll just have to fix that. Nah, of course, she predictably chickened out, and without nothing much else to do, she at least tried to see if it could work on the elderly farmer couple that they were helping.
くだらん。おじいさん。くだらんものにくだらんと言うて何人かが。
Jeez, this old dude must really love yelling at clouds. Can I join you? Seeing the old codgers fight, Nagisa believed that the mirror was broken, and yeah, you can guess what the lesson of the day is going to be for this episode. Still, predictable lesson or not, it was interesting to see the multiple relationships parallel one another. While very much the opposites in their ideals and beliefs, Honoka and Kiriya managed to have some strong chemistry as they worked off one another really nicely. The former even helped the latter when he got hurt. Meanwhile, Nagisa and Fujipi's ship was clearly going nowhere, as there just wasn't much for the other to be attracted to. Both were just too similar, and thus had little reason to take the next step up in an actual relationship. Again, good solid writing that I always do appreciate when it's done right in this franchise. But hey, let's not restrict ourselves to all that pretentious subtlety and just bring in a big stupid monster.
にしては変だな。
The anime adaptation of Tremors is looking great. Going away from the elderly couple, who of course showed their love for one another by protecting each other. Meanwhile, our heroines transformed right in front of them. Yeah, I mean, okay, they don't actually bring it up later, so maybe they didn't see it or anything, but come on, the framing of the shot totally made it look like the elderly couple should have seen them. Well, whatever. The two tried to fight the giant worms, but without Kevin Bacon by their side, they ended up getting split up, with Honoka being singled out from Nagisa. However, Kiriya accidentally, quote-unquote, let up on the barrier that was keeping Nagisa out just as Poisony was going to deliver the finishing blow to her partner.
ヒーロー登場ってね。ヒロインでしょ。
Don't tell that to Sora. But yeah, a really nice episode with a strong lesson that also advanced a very significant subplot. Also, interesting to know that Yoshimi Narita is a Tremors fan. Episode 18 opened with... Okay, dude, seriously, it's starting to sound like you're really backed up. Okay, all jokes aside, it's probably a good time as any to elaborate on the Dokuzone's goals. Due to the king basically being an embodiment of destruction, he was essentially a living black hole, giving him absolute power over his dominion that would eventually swallow him up too, as he was slowly losing control over his ever-expanding powers. Thus, they required the powers of creation from the Prism Stones in order to produce a theoretical endless cycle of creation and destruction. So yeah, while these characters were still very cartoonishly evil talking about the powers of darkness as though this were freaking Kingdom Hearts, they were at least motivated by the preservation of their own world, giving them at least some depth. They're nowhere near as epic as, say, the Masters of Soul from Gao Geiger Final, who were trying to destroy a whole universe just to preserve their own, but at least they did have some interesting motivations. That said, one of their own ranks wasn't exactly sure if it was a good idea to follow an entity who couldn't exactly guarantee a great future for them, at least compared to the one that Honoka was giving him. Meanwhile, the other heroine of our story had to deal with her own issues.
だからテストじゃん。今したくない。
Most realistic ranking of the show so far. And of course her crush was on Kiriya, who might have taken soccer advice from Daisuke by the looks of it. Still, he did have a good relationship with Honoka, and these were honestly the best parts of the episode, as it continued his little arc about learning how to open up to others, and not just blindly following the orders of a king who ultimately couldn't guarantee his own survival, much less that of his minions. And yet, he was still scared to define him in any way, as the preservation of the world he was raised in also hung in the balance. And while moving to the human world might have been an option, there was also no guarantee that he could find preservation there, and thus he tried to reject everything about it, including a love confession from Seiko. Great stuff that was only slightly broken up thanks to Mepple's antics. Jeez, imagine if this character actually got a whole episode to himself. Alright, back to the actually good plotline with Seiko retrying her love confession, only to reveal that Honoka had encouraged her to do this, which got him a little peeved, and he just outright tore up her love letter. This resulted in said superheroine confronting him over this, and trying to scold him for not considering the girl's feelings, whilst not considering that the clearly very evil boy had his own issues that were ultimately triggered second-handedly by her meddling. I mean, obviously Honoka wasn't in the wrong for just encouraging her friend to do her best and not even knowing that she was interested in Kiriya, but trying to force someone to open up to others is hardly any better than Kiriya's own actions. Again, the Dotsuku Zone isn't exactly the most fleshed out villain faction, even for this franchise's first, but Kiriya was a definite standout as an antagonist caught between two worlds. One world where he was born and raised in, and another world where he was starting to develop emotions and attachments to, mostly thanks to the affections of a character who was currently trying to take a moral high ground with him. Yeah, this is just amazing writing. Honestly, I wouldn't have minded if they had just ended the episode here, but we still had a fight that acted more like a nice little bonus to an already great story. Poisony, I'm guessing, made a deal with Kanzaki to send our heroines to the mirror world, resulting in them fighting in a Funhouse-esque Hall of Mirrors. Needless to say, this made for a very interesting setting that, when combined with some really good animation, turned it into a real standout of the season, especially with this brutal-ass move. Losers. She did try to defeat them in a way that Kanzaki probably could have done with some of the writers of his little game, but fortunately, they were rescued by a certain third party. Going right into the next episode. Can we just skip this one? It's plot relevant? Okay. So, yeah, the main conflict of this episode came about because Meppo was being a total pig in front of his girlfriend and cost me a monitor when I saw this face. I mean, granted, they at least admitted that he was being a glutton and that his behavior was unacceptable as he was ignoring those around him, and there was even some hinting at that he was using it as a coping mechanism for their stressful situation involving the Field of Rainbows and the fact that they didn't have a home right now. In short, his writing was at least one step above Yui Nagomi's. That said, it did make this character and the conflict of this episode that much better, as Mipple rightfully chewed him out for his selfish behavior. Like, dude, you're far from the only one suffering from the fact that your kingdom fell apart. Stop acting like a spoiled brat and get your head in the game. Not helping matters was how it was clear that things were going to end with both sides apologizing, which, no. Yeah, she should have said more to the little putz. But yeah, as we said, this episode was significant in that it did provide a little more lore, including how apparently a very similar power of creation that the Prism Stones produce was being spread across the Earth. So basically the power of life and all that. A fact the villains were clearly very aware of, and what one of their last generals decided to take full advantage of. Damn, Piccolo, you need to get a little more sun. You're starting to look a little pale there. Now, of course, it was Ikubo whose extreme actions even surprised his cohorts. In Kiriya's case, it was obviously because of his slow face turn arc, but in Poisony's case, it probably had nothing to do with sympathy, and more like, dude, what are you doing? You're slaughtering the cattle before we can even completely milk them. Though to be fair, he might have also been trying to lure out their enemy in a last desperate play, as their king was at the end of the line. And sure enough, as one of the last generals, he proved there was a massive power gap by pushing our heroines away multiple times with very similar animations. I mean, yeah, the animators are accomplishing their job of making this guy feel incredibly dominant, but still, it's a pretty lame fight. And to top it all off, the day was saved by Meppel after our heroines had their powers absorbed by the albino Piccolo. I remind you, this is after he's been a total brat for half the episode, and just the scene before, he refused to apologize for his behavior, so just excuse me if I find this to be one of the most insincere and forced comebacks ever. But yeah, without even landing a hit on the guy, the powers of life were restored to the Precure and the city, though our heroines got a little extra in the process and defeated Ukubo in their usual fashion. And overall, this episode sucked, and I hope this idiot gets the Cube treatment.
Worth it.
Episode 20 opened with Honoka mixing up a perfume in Science Club, which according to Nagisa smelled like Europe, so I guess she put in a little too much alcohol? But yeah, it would become a significant plot point as Poisony overheard their conversation, including how the two were going to walk home together with Nagisa weighing ahead of Honoka.
ちょっと待ってよ、まだ学校なんだから。
Well, I see someone didn't go through any sort of character development. Was this guy actually the prototype for Yui? Actually, they even referenced the previous episode, and Mippo excused his a-hole behavior by saying that Mippo would accept him no matter how toxic he was. Yeah, if anyone can justify this character as not being one of the absolute worst in this show, please try. Anyway, Honoka soon arrived, only for Honoka to appear shortly after. Yeah, you could probably guess where this is going, though thanks to it, we did get another nice shipping moment between Honoka and Kiriya, which, considering what's happening next, yeah, this is gonna get sad. Anyway, back with Nagisa and quote-unquote Honoka, the latter managed to make some very believable excuses for her unusual behavior, like not wanting to eat the really tasty-looking takoyaki. Seriously, that's straight-up food prawn right there. And even managed to lead the conversation to a point where she almost got Meppel, but...
それよりミップル見せてよ。ミップル？それよ。
Oh no, Honoka was a tourist this whole time. Nah, of course, it was Poisony in disguise, and in spite of some of the usual janky animation of Mitsuru Aoyama, god, this guy's not changed at all over the years, the actual direction of the episode did manage to make it feel like a legit horror film as Poison Honoka stalked her prey. Eventually, the real Honoka did manage to catch up, but again, through some clever direction, it was impossible to tell who was the real one at first, as they had cut away from both characters during this little chase. It made for a really tense situation as both Honokas managed to provide some very believable cases for why they were the real deal, with both even managing to produce a card commune. I would ask why the real Honoka didn't have Mippo come out if they weren't on a crowded train, so yeah, this is all a really clever setup. That said, I do wonder what the other passengers are thinking when looking at this scene. Geez, did this girl actually cheat on her girlfriend with her twin sister or something? Ultimately, the real Honoka managed to reveal herself thanks to staying an entry from their little diary exchange back in episode 8 that Nagisa would never reveal in public. Again, really clever and smart writing in this episode. Then with the cat out of the bag, our heroines tried to hide in the abandoned warehouse district. Better make it quick, girls, they're gonna do a giant robot fight there soon. Okay, Kiriya overall might have been the best villain, but can we all just agree that this character had the best VA? And yeah, if you couldn't tell by her going full Karen mode, this was going to be Poisony's last fight, and to her credit, she made it count, actually wailing on our heroines for the most part. Moreover, she went full Inhuman Medusa by using her red head to separate the two, preventing them from using the marble screw, which thanks to working with Piccolo, she didn't even have any trouble avoiding it.
What are you going to teach me today? A brand new technique? How to sense energy? What about how to fly?
Dodge!
Though, ironically, both of these issues ended up canceling each other out, as after briefly getting their hands back together, the Cures just had to send their attacks through her hair. Oh, Poisony, you might be a creepy furry, but at least you're pretty darn hilarious. But yeah, the villains were down to 2, and one of them, as if to contrast with his sister's scream that felt victorious and even kind of hilarious, there was nothing but sorrow in Kiriya's wail. While it's hard to say how much he truly cared about Poisony, the thing that was likely on Kiriya's mind was the fact that he and the Dotsukazone were on their last legs. Thus, to preserve the survival of his homeworld and in turn himself, they needed the Prism Stones. However, as has been stated, Earth and its people had become a bit of a second home to him, and his attachment to them, and in particular one girl, prevented him from pursuing what everyone was telling him was his destiny, as everything had to revolve his so-called king. Oh, come on, dude, you're exaggerating. I mean, how bad can the power of light be? And oh god, it burns! But yeah, with that, the 21st episode, one of my favorites of the series by the way, focused on this conflict of a boy stuck between the two worlds. With that, he confronted Konoka as some atmospheric weather conveniently came in for dramatic effect.
どうしちゃったの?
Kiriya revealed his true identity and so-called intentions to Honoka, as well as his own wish that would have made things a lot easier. With that, the two parted ways, and the sort of true heroine of the show at this point tried to get some advice from her grandmother and best friend. The former gave her the standard talk about defying destiny and all that jazz, while the latter... Nagisa, language, girl! But yeah, after the second best spit take I've ever seen, Honoka revealed Kiriya's true identity, and you know, if I have any complaints with this otherwise really fantastic episode, I do think they kind of overdo it with the comedy. I mean, I get it, levity and all that, but it does get distracting, and more importantly, takes away time they could be spending interacting with Kiriya. Plus, at this point, anything involving Mepple and Mipple's relationship is just eye-rolling. Whatever though, still really good stuff here, as Kiriya sent a letter to Honoka.
明日朝4時.
Hey, that's usually when our Wednesday videos go up in Hawaii time. Thanks for the free advertising. Of course, it turned out to be a letter of challenge to both of our heroines, and while I'll say right now, this wasn't the best animated fight of the series, especially compared to some of the other generals, it's honestly one of, if not my favorite, for just the theming and subtle storytelling. I mean, for one thing, Kiriya has never been this open about challenging our heroines directly, and would more likely work from the shadows. Hell, if he played his cards right, he probably could have covertly taken the stones from under their noses. And on top of that, the visible sweat that could be seen on his face, and it starts to become clear he didn't really want to fight or betray these two. But at this point, to him at least, he had run out of options, or at least the ones that would lead to his survival, as there was only one outcome he truly desired from all of this.
ほう、いつもの技を使わないんですか? 受けて立ちますよ.
He wanted them to see him as just another one of the evil generals they had already defeated, so that he could at least go out like a warrior, and more importantly, be spared the choice of choosing between betraying either of the worlds that had become a home to him. And yet, our heroines couldn't see him as just another villain. Have I mentioned yet how this is one of my favorite episodes of the series? And yes, they did put in an insert song here called Heart to Heart by Tomoko Nakajima. It's an excellent song that I did consider to put in my top insert songs of Precure list video, but it was overtaken by another song from the same series that was just that much better, but we'll get to it soon enough. Regardless, the lyrics to this song match perfectly with this scene, as they describe Kiriya's conflicting emotions towards the Precure, in particular of course Honoka, and his desire to just settle down and live a happy life amongst them. However, such a happy ending would never happen as long as he served under his king, and the minute he tried to leave their ranks and handed the cures his stone, his fate had been sealed. This was an amazing episode, like just one of those that really makes you appreciate that this franchise has been going on for as long as it has. I could honestly care less about all the toys and makeup product placement. I just want good stories like this where our characters have to stand by their morals and beliefs even as they fight those who they thought they could trust, and in this case, were proven right to do so even if it came at a massive. So how do you follow up such a god tier episode? Just do one about the dogs. I mean, 22 isn't a bad episode or anything, and it does at least kind of progress the main plot, but yeah, after the emotional roller coaster that was the previous episode, this feels just a tad bit out of place. Anyway, the canine in question was Honoka's golden retriever, Chutaro.
まあクモの巣なんかくっつけて。
一体どこにいたの？
Boy, did you use your one from Spider-Man?
Everybody gets one.
Actually, he got it from taking care of a lost dog named Moko that he had found.
中太郎が子供産んだ。中太郎はオスよ。
Shh, don't say stuff like that, Honoka. Do you want to get cancelled? Still, thankfully, this plot wouldn't take up the whole episode, as we also did get a little bit of world building and foreshadowing, as we learned how wisdom essentially resided in a pocket dimension between the worlds to safeguard the stones. It's actually a really interesting and very practical bit of lore, as it would theoretically make it nigh impossible for the baddies to get to him. Honestly, I do kind of wish they had highlighted this plot point just a little more for reasons we'll get to later. Anyway, back to the dog subplot. They tried to track down Moko's owner, but they had already moved out, and as we later learned, the pooch had jumped out of the moving van. And we learned this as the two dogs had communicated each other a la Homeward Bound.
アキオちゃんか。きっと心配してるぞ。お前がいなくなって。
Mine's not from Faye as a dog daddy. Isn't that kind of funny? Don't show it! I'll give this episode this. While I do find the dog subplot somewhat superfluous, especially considering what the original plans for this series were, that again we'll get to later, this was still cute stuff, and jeez, did these animators go in hard when animating these two pooches. Like legit, these are some of the best dog designs I've ever seen in anime, looking fairly realistic, yet still highlighting the cute features of them. Also, yeah, them talking without moving their lips does just kind of work better, and does make things feel a little too uncanny valley. Right, Disney? Meanwhile, our heroines continued their search for Moko's owner, leading them to the planetarium that he had frequented. There, they were celebrating Tanabata, the Japanese holiday, about the legends surrounding the constellations of the Summer Triangle.
私は小さい頃バトルレンジャーになりたかったんだよね。
That's a bit of a deep cut. However, I guess someone wasn't a fan of that legend as they Zakenified the telescope projector. Not that our heroines minded it at first, as even after their partners pointed out that something was up, they all just sat back down and relaxed. Do y'all have the attention spans of goldfish or something? Well, they did take notice when the constellations started attacking.
12級 X レア天活神器スコルスピアレベル2で召喚
We really should get around to doing some kind of Battle Spirits retrospective. But yeah, this resulted in a pretty sweet fight, as the Kirias had to deal with multiple constellation monsters that had the advantage of being able to go intangible. They did get a little help from Chutaro pulling an ace from Batman Beyond, but ultimately they just had to defeat the projector Zakenna. However, the real challenge came once Ikubo revealed himself. Of course, he tried to force them to reveal the location of the Prism Stones, but our heroes knew that as long as they did nothing, they'd be forced into a stalemate, and with the king's limited time left, victory was pretty much all but guaranteed. But...
ドンはちゃんと石の番人が守ってるから絶対安全綿棒。
石の番人。
Yep, it's official. I don't like this character. Because sure enough, Ikubo was familiar with wisdom, and just now needed time to devise a plan of forcing him out now that he knew he was involved. Way to go, dude.
You suck!
Are we sure he's not the leader of Shocker? Anyway, the episode ended with them finding Moko's owner's wish on the Tanabata bamboo that included his address for everyone to see. Yeah, way to self-dox yourself there, kid. Also, this is a bit of a cheap shot, you jerks.
その夜、ほのかは泣いたんだって。涙が枯れるまで泣いたんだって。
The 23rd episode started a two-parter where both of our heroines found themselves participating in training camps for their respective clubs at the same campsite. And while the science club were stuck with their boomer principal, at least they didn't have to deal with a Karen alumni. You know, looking at my script, I'm starting to realize this show seems to have a lot of crazy middle-aged ladies. Later, they learned about a deity that supposedly protected the mountains.
明日の朝6時にちゃんと起きられますように。
Hey, don't make him try to do the impossible, girl. However, things seemed to go south when one of Nagisa's friends, Shiho, had disappeared, and then there was a sudden blackout. With that, it seemed like the villains were launching some kind of an attack. Perhaps they were going to use Shiho as a hostage, and she was just in the bathroom, and there had been a power surge.
Well, that was pointless.
I mean, yeah, the power surge was likely because of Ikubo, as we'll soon see, but this whole scene of them looking for Shiho was kind of superfluous. Anyway, the next day, things really did start to take a turn for the worse.
昨日は水いっぱいだったのに。
Spiriting away and blatant environmentalist messages. Was this directed by Hayao Miyazaki? Guess there aren't enough clouds for him to yell at today. Nah, as we just said, it was Ikubo siphoning off the energy from the area, including all of the electricity at the campsite, leaving the Precure and their clubmates stranded in the mountains. Thus, the two went into action, and after this simple yet pretty cool rotation shot, they found Ikubo, or rather, he found them. He had figured out where Wisdom was hiding, and realized that the Precure's powers were being picked up by him. Thus, all he had to do is force them to use their powers, and then he could trace the signals back to the pocket dimension. It's actually pretty clever stuff, and I do like that we're actually dealing with a smart general, rather than the usual meatheads of the show, aside from Kiriya. Though, that's not to say he couldn't back up his words with force, as once again, Ikubo just wailed on our heroines in a well-animated fight by Toshie Kawamura.
一握りの優れた支配者のためにの命のエネルギーは全て弱。
That makes sense to me.
Left with no other options, the Precure tried to use their finisher, as usual, but this was exactly what the baddie wanted, as after again just easily tanking it, the attack sent off a strong signal, which is all he needed to open a portal to Wisdom's pocket dimension and capture him and most of the Prism Stones.
狭間を漂う能力がある者の噂は聞いていた。
Yeah, could I just take a minute to remind everyone out there that most of this is all Meppo's fault? Just kind of wanted to point that out. This act did end up draining Ikubo, so he retreated, having accomplished his main objective. Things continued right into the next episode, where the clubs were still dealing with being trapped in the mountains with no means of contacting the outside world, as though this were all some sort of setup to a cliched slasher film. And the principals certainly weren't helping matters. Why do I get the feeling like the guys from Cabin in the Woods have taken over the show? Of course, the Precure's version of Jason Voorhees had a few more tricks up his sleeve, or in this case, maybe it was more like Freddy, as he was able to force everyone besides the Precure into deep sleeps. But yeah, Ikubo was once again forcing their hand with the threat of leaving them in eternal comas unless they fought him. And with that, more than half of this episode was going to be a fight scene, which should have been great, but I think they might have blown their budget on that Kawamura animation from the last episode. Though to be fair, the animation quality here wasn't bad, not great, but I think what was really holding this back was the choreography.
Nope.
I mean, again, I get that they have to make Ikubo look strong by having him dominate over our heroines, but some of this stuff is just more laughable than anything. And out of nowhere, I guess he summoned the spirits of the many destroyed buildings of the abandoned warehouse district. Well, anyway, he just kept on wailing on the Precure, to the point that he had to save them at one point just to make recovering their Prism Stones easier for him. They did eventually land a clean hit on him, but even that proved meaningless, as he then just went full DBZ face and pulled the Prism Stones right off the fairies. With that, the villains had all 7 stones and all hope seemed lost.
だったら奇跡を起こせばいいじゃない。奇跡を起こす。そう。
Translation, let's hope for a good Deus Ex Machina. Yeah, forget the marble screw constantly bailing them out. This is the worst example of our heroines making a comeback when they really didn't earn it. Ikubo dominated 95% of this fight, and had it not been for the Prism Stones proving too much for his darkness, god, this is Kingdom Hearts, the villains would have won. But no, the stones rejected him with no help from our heroines, and they just blew him away as usual. Anyway, with that, they not only regained the Hoppish and the stones, but also took Ikubo's. And after finally getting off the mountain, likely towards a lawsuit for the school, the Precure finally completed their collection by adding in their fairy stones. Oh god, are they actually summoning Shenron? No, instead, they got this sudden new product placement named Pulun, who was the prince of the Field of Light, and invited our heroines to his home.
響く光の王子ポルンだポポ。
光の王子やら選ばれし勇者やら。
Yeah, I wouldn't trust him either. He does kind of sound like this one Eldritch abomination I know. This continued right into the next episode, with our heroines following the prince to his kingdom. All the while, Honoka's granny slept through her house, turning into an Aurora Borealis.
Aurora Borealis. At this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely within your kitchen.
Yes.
That's it?
No.
And on the other end of the rainbow, they did find a pot of gold, but rather some good old copyright infringements. Seriously, Nintendo cracks down on YouTube, but not this. Also, shouldn't this guy also be voiced by Tomokazu Seki?
昔は一面の花畑だっためっぽ。
さあマリオさん冒険の始まりです。
But yeah, more than half the kingdom had been conquered by the Dotsuku Zone, and thus the Precure made their way to the still-standing palace. There, they met the wise elder, because every season needs one.
陽子さんと恵子さんじゃったか？
え、陽子さん。
Well, he got your VA correct at least. As well as the fairies from the cards who rightfully chewed out Beppo for his selfish behavior. Needless to say, this was one of my favorite scenes in the whole anime. And after reiterating stuff that we already pretty much knew because the world building of the series is still relatively simplistic, the Precure met the Queen of Light.
はじめまして。
Oh, so this franchise has always had a giantess fetish. But yeah, cheap CGI that made her look like a mannequin aside, the queen at least had a pretty cool design that did give off the whole ruler of light thing. And after giving the standard congratulations to the Precure, because this is really starting to feel like a basic-ass JRPG, they made their way to what should have been the final stage of their adventure, as they placed a hotfish and altar to begin the restoration of the field. However, King Constipation wasn't going to give up without a fight, and neither was his servant.
あいつは
許さん。
まさかイルクーボか。
Because yeah, that totally looks like Galbino Piccolo. But yeah, he had essentially become a Zakenda so powerful that not even some recycled animation could stop him. Thus, he managed to take our heroines and the hotfish, leading into the final episode for this video, and the final boss. In front of the king, and with Ikubo behind them, our heroines were trapped. The latter even took on a more proper form, becoming jacked as all hell, and yet again, he wiped the floor with them. Granted, the Precure at least put up a better fight than their last outing, helped with some pretty brutal choreography. However, all hope seemed lost, and okay, what sort of Deus Ex Machina is going to come next? Is it going to be the queen, or the power of friendship, or... Jarky himself. Okay, I'll admit I didn't see that coming on my first viewing, but only because it makes no sense. Or, you know, you could have told him to stop, or just not hit the hotfish, and he might have eventually defeated the Precure, but no. Jeez, Ikubo has to be one of the most unfortunate villains of this whole franchise. I mean, he pretty much defeated the Precure in all of their encounters, with them only really taking the W thanks to some sort of outside interference. Hashtag Ikubo deserved better. Anyway, Jarky gave a speech about how darkness was going to take over the universe, because I guess he has an obsession with the heat death of the universe, and just wanted to speed up the process. However, the Precure countered with a very standard hero speech, and of course went with their old reliable, which, considering how useless it was in this final arc, naturally it failed. And yet, while a lot of this is admittedly very cliched, yada Mr. Kiriya, I do admit, a part of me does kind of like this overly cheesy light versus darkness fight. Part of it was because of Nagisa and Honoka's indomitable determination and will that helped them get this far, which has and always will be one of the main hearts of this franchise. However, it also doesn't feel totally earned, as what has gotten us here wasn't totally thanks to our heroines. We'll get more into that during the closing thoughts, but for now, I will say, while I understand what they were going for here, and can give them some leeway, it just didn't completely work out in my opinion. Now, what did work out, for the most part, was at least this final clash, as Queenie joined in and provided some legit support. I know, right? There was a time when the Royals actually did something, as not only did she provide a speech that would summarize this franchise and everything it stood for, she also gave the two a literal final push they needed to defeat Jarky with the marble screw.
Now's your chance!
Honestly, I'm not even that big a fan of DBZ these days, and yet I'm surprised at how many references I was able to make in this one video. And yes, this is that insert song scene that we were talking about that actually made it onto our top list, and while Kiriya's scene did have arguably much stronger theming and was far more emotional, as far as significance to this franchise was concerned, this did hold much greater importance. Not to mention, yeah, Shining Star by Tomoko Nakajima is a banger, and definitely my personal preference when it comes to music. Again, Nakajima's other song arguably had much stronger lyrics, as they perfectly reflected Kiriya's emotions during that scene, while this was literally just singing all of the praises of the Precure, but the presentation here just completely overtook it in terms of grandiose. Anyway, Perfect Cell, Jarky was defeated, but 3 objects seemed to disperse from his ashes that no one pointed out, so I'm sure they won't become important later. And with that, the Field of Light was restored to its former glory, meaning that the fairy partners could now live happily ever after in their homeworld. Thus, they exchanged tearful farewells with their respective partners, and I'm sure, like many endings to a magical girl anime, they will never see each other again, and...
What a surprise.
Yeah, even at the beginning of this franchise, I'm pretty sure this is a common thing with many magical girl anime endings, but whatever, the gang was back together with one little addition. And that was the OG Futari Precure, and while there are some definite growing pains, I gotta say, this is a fun little look back. You could certainly make out some of the components that would become staples of the franchise, especially during that final fight, but it was just as clear that they were still trying to find an identity. They would establish a much more solid basis in later seasons, but I think this is still a nice little start. What do you mean we still have a second half? Okay, so a little explanation. Originally, the series was penned in to just be a 2-course series totaling 26 episodes, with no plans to turn it into the massive franchise it is today. However, after seeing the toy sales and ratings, Toei realized that they had a cash cow on hand that they could milk to the point of malnutrition for the next 19 years. Yeah, y'all do realize that anniversaries can only count in units of time and not by the number of shows, right? Well, anyway, because of this, and much like their previous magical cash cow, Ojamajo Doremi, they threw in some obvious sequel baiting like those 3 objects that came out of King Jark. The fact that no one reacted to them was a clear sign that they were added in at the last minute, which would be easy enough, you just have to add a few extra layers to an already completed scene. With all that in mind though, and ignoring that sequel bait, would this have stood out as a legendary one-shot magical girl anime? Maybe? I wouldn't doubt it would produce a cult following, but I don't think these 26 episodes alone could be considered top-tier material overall. There were certainly great moments here, like some of the Sakuga scenes made by longtime vets like Yoshikazu Tomita and Naotoshi Shida were amazing, and of course, if you couldn't tell by my gushing all over it, the Kiriya arc was fantastic. He was just such a truly tragic villain caught between 2 worlds who ultimately couldn't bring himself to destroy one, and ultimately was unable to live in either. On his own, Kiriya was an amazing villain, but when compared with the rest of his crew, yeah, he felt like he was from a different, much better show, as the Dotsuku Zone just kind of sucked overall. In terms of menace and cheesy villainy, they were adequate. However, as the series went on, they just evolved into some very basic cookie-cutter baddies who were often on repeat, just restating their goals and their obsession with the darkness. All the while, they just kind of used brute force for the most part to get the job done. Compared to later seasons, where even if the characters were cartoonishly evil, at least they changed up their strategies to keep things interesting. Poisony and Ukubo did kind of do this during their last encounters with the Cures, but it didn't quite make up for the lack of personality, especially in the case of the latter. And of course, the worst of all, in more ways than one, was King Jark. He probably repeated himself the most, and just couldn't do much while stuck on his little perch. Now again, just from a pure spectacle standpoint of presenting a fight of good versus evil, these guys actually did a pretty good job, but as far as being interesting characters, they're a party of one. That said, and let's be honest here, the two things that won people over were right there in the title. From the start to the end of what became the first half of the series, Nagisa and Honoka had one of the most believable friendships, going from just classmates to best friends, bumps in the road and all, like any friendship in existence really. Slowly but surely, they warmed up to each other, and you could see the makings of one of the biggest aspects of this franchise that the creators don't bring up directly, but we can all see it. Beyond that though, they were just fun characters with good contrasting personalities, with the tomboy Nagisa actually being a little more socially awkward, especially when it came to the opposite sex, whilst Honoka, the bookworm, could really be outspoken under the right conditions. This did lead to her overall having a slightly bigger role, especially in regards to the Kiriya arc, but that's not to say Nagisa didn't contribute, as she did bring up some good points about how they did get along. And together, they just made for a great team. All of that said though, I would say overall, this first half was janky. My issues with the villains aside, some of the ways they were defeated did feel more than a little forced, with either the Marble Screw just being their instant win condition, or something else doing a lot of the work for the cures, like the Prism Stones pretty much being what led to both of Ikubo's demises. This was likely due to the simplistic and kind of last minute world building, as a lot of stuff just kind of got dumped on us in the last few episodes. If they had truly ended here, I would say the series had its moments, but otherwise was just above average. However, this was far from the end, as this particular series, including its direct sequel, would continue for a year and a half more. And when we come back next time, we'll see if they manage to address my issues in the second half that was originally not meant to be, so yeah, it might still be a little rough in areas. Still, do look forward to it, and check out some of our other videos, including our weekly reviews of the current series of whatever is airing by the time you watch this. And until next time though, for now my friends, and did someone just bite into a crunch bar? Not my problem.